Yes, yes, truly, because I was thinking last night, what can I possibly say? I'm speaking after these brilliant people who really have seen their work make changes in other people's lives. And I thought, what can I tell them? Well, I will try to tell you something, but I'm a knowledge worker. I think politics have become more complicated than when I started out about 40 years ago. At that time, you could say, U.S., get out of Vietnam, and people agreed with you or they didn't, but at least they knew what you were talking about. And now, if you say, you know, we've got to get rid of the GATS, and we have to stop the WTO, and the World Bank and the IMF are ruining the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and the Lisbon Treaty is something you really don't want to be ruling your life. And so this all takes a bit of explanation, right? Because it's not obvious. And that's the kind of work that I try to do. But I feel that everything is so long-term in what I do that I sometimes feel I'm only just getting started. And I'm never going to see the end of it. Now, of course, people come up to me and they say, I read this or that book that you wrote, and now I'm doing so-and-so. So I know that I've had some influence on people. But major changes, I mean, I'll do my best, but I'm quite seriously, I'm not trying to be amusing or anything. I just feel that in many ways, the work that I do, you cannot measure the impact. So I'll try to say when I have had maybe a measurable effect, but I haven't stopped hunger. I haven't got rid of all the debt in the world, of the poor countries, although I should perhaps say that I was given an honorary doctoral degree by Newcastle University at the same time as Gordon Brown, who I think is sincere about, you know, debt. I think he's worried about debt. I won't say he's sincere about everything, but that, I think, you know, he really is worried about it. And he said, when did you write your first book on debt? And I said, 20 years ago. And he said, well, you see how long it takes us to get anything on the agenda. That is my life. My life is seeing how long it takes to get anything on the agenda. So I haven't brought down the World Bank. I haven't stopped the WTO. But I have contributed tremendously, I think, to the movement of GATS-free zones in Europe, which in France, we got about 800 local governments to sign up as GATS-free zones. Now, you see, every time I would go into a local community and make a speech about this, it would take 45 minutes and the whole evening of discussion. So I'm not going to tell you what the GATS is in detail. It's the services agreement of the WTO, whose aim is to privatize absolutely every human activity, except the police, the army, and the judiciary, and even there, you know, and religion.
And weapons.
And weapons, of course. And even there, you know, there are exceptions. But we did get 800 local governments, which cover probably about 4/5 of the population of France. Now, not all the population of France knows this, of course, and these are symbolic because we are ruled from outside by powers which go well beyond the national borders, but it was in some ways a symbolic victory. José, yesterday, when he introduced me, explained about the MAI, about the Multilateral Agreement on Investment. And there I can say yes.
Success.
My work did have an impact because we did get it onto the front pages. The government was obliged to name a commission. I testified in front of the commission. They only asked 2 NGOs, the one I was then head of called the Globalization Observatory, which doesn't exist anymore, and Greenpeace. And I just crushed the commission. I mean, I really knew the dossier, and I was able to, and they had to take those arguments into account. Now, that brings me back, and then France withdrew, and then the thing collapsed. But this brings me back to what I believe to be the value of knowledge. I think it's more and more difficult to get anything done unless you know the context and not just the technical details, but what I would call the power arrows. Here we are in a beautiful place. Let's say this is the center of the world. Outside of that is Spain. Outside of that is Europe. Outside of that is the international system, both public and private, with the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the WTO, very important, and the transnational corporations and the banks in this international system. And then finally, we have the planetary system, and that's the one that that can dictate the most to us, because you don't argue with systems as powerful as the climate system. So either we can do something about that right now, or it's going to go off the charts. These are things we know. One thing makes me very angry, and that is being right all the time. I mean, but it's true. It sounds, as though I'm trying to be amusing, but it's true. We know what the causes are of hunger. We know what are the impacts of debt on poor people. We know that structural adjustment policies are ruinous. And we know that transnational corporations are using transfer pricing, tax havens, not paying their taxes, and abusing their power and not providing very much employment. And so these power arrows are what I try to study. And I try then to explain them to other people so that they will take them into account in their own work. And sometimes this kind of work makes you very cynical, because I have come to believe, one, that there is no degree of human suffering which in and of itself will cause these powerful forces to change. It is not because you can say that so many children are dying as of this morning before we all had breakfast. It's not because you can say women are dying in childbirth. It's not because you can say, you can describe the misery all you like. And this cuts no ice at all with the ruling forces. And sometimes I think to myself, we're all here talking about how these policies have failed. And in everything I go to, their policies have failed. No, they haven't. They haven't failed because they set out to make a certain group extremely rich, extremely powerful, and these groups are not thinking in terms of long time, long history, certainly not thinking in natural time and cosmic time.
Dream time.
And so these policies have succeeded for them because they have made a very thin fringe immeasurably rich, and this is the story of the lifetime of most of us here. So I do try to explain what's going on, and I would, since I have maybe another 5 minutes, I would just like to say that yesterday, nobody mentioned Europe at all. And I think that we really have to take Europe into account. 85% of all of the policies that affect you in Mallorca are going to come not from here, not from Madrid, but from Brussels. And what Europe is doing in our name is criminal, particularly in the present context. I know that in Spain, I mean, people are very surprised when I come and explain what our campaign was against the constitutional treaty. And maybe that's a victory too, because I did contribute quite a lot to that campaign, and then I tried to help the Irish as well to some degree, and maybe that I was a small part of those victories too. But the Spaniards were the first to vote on the Constitution, and all you got was sports stars coming on and saying Europe is a good thing and vote yes. And also your own democracy coincides with your belonging to Europe. And then you got structural funds, which were about 1% of your internal PIB, of your gross domestic product, for about 20 years. So of course you're favorably disposed towards Europe. And most people who bothered to vote, not many did, but those who bothered to vote largely voted yes. So we voted no because we studied the text and we were able to make it the biggest debate that I have seen in France since 1968. And this debate became such a big thing that lovers were fighting over the dinner table because one was voting yes and one was voting no. Brothers and sisters, friends, you know, I mean, people were really excited about this. It was a huge, huge thing. But we had many very good reasons, believe me, to vote against it. Obliged to increase our military forces and our military capacities, obliged to put absolutely everything into competition, always accompanied by free and undistorted competition. That includes public services, of course. That means that also the free movement of capital, goods, services, and people across the borders. That means no hindrance to capital, therefore no taxes on international circulation of capital. What the Trade Commission is doing, José has said something about that. The bilateral agreements that up until a few days ago, it was Peter Mandelson, now it's probably a woman who is less dangerous, but Mandelson has been pushing economic partnership agreements with the poorest countries in the world, the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific countries, it says in the Constitution that that is one of Europe's objectives, is to bring everyone into the free trade system. And by that they mean not just what happens at the border, but what happens with government regulations. It means allowing a free rein to transnational corporations of all kinds, including water, including seed companies, including everything. So the Lisbon Treaty is a carbon copy of the Constitution. They took out the flag, they took out the Beethoven hymn, and the rest is the same. So increase military capacities, privatize everything, and allow total freedom for transnational corporations. That in 3 sentences. I could go on longer, but I just really want you to have this in mind, because this kind of a Europe is going to infect everything we do, and the independence, the total political independence of the central bank, the European Central Bank, is going to make it very difficult to do what we need to do, and I will go back to what I said yesterday and then I'll be quiet. What we need to do now is to use the financial crisis, which is our money, and we must never forget this, it's our past, present, and future money. And we need to use this crisis to say, now you are going to listen to us, and you are going to fund the ecological and social transformation of Europe. And that's going to be very difficult to do with the European Central Bank. So if I have any successful experiences or anything I can communicate to you, I cannot insist strongly enough on the need to build coalitions, the need to build alliances, the need to look at what our concerns are. What are your concerns? Make a map of your concerns. What do you really want to do? Make a circle. Put all your concerns in a circle. And then ask your neighbor, what are your concerns? And then see where your circles overlap. You're not going to agree maybe on absolutely everything, but you will find that there is considerable overlap in what you do agree on, and that is what you have to understand and build upon. And this is what we must do with broader and broader coalitions. Up to now, mostly in the movement, we have talked to the converted. No? I spend a lot of time talking to the converted. But every opportunity I get, I talk to the not converted also. I mean, to business people or to government people when I can. And here we have to look harder for the overlapping parts of our concerns. But surely saving the climate ought to be one of them. And although it is still difficult in some circles to make people believe in the severity of the crisis and the urgency of the crisis, I think that they are coming slowly to see what must be done. So here I would say we have to look towards business to make alliances, because there are parts of business that are concerned for selfish or altruistic reasons. Who cares what the reasons are? But that we must now make that effort to go beyond and see where are the overlapping concerns and work with whoever we can. Because as I said yesterday and keep on, insisting, none of us can win by ourselves. The farmers can't win the farming struggles alone. The workers can't win just through their trade unions. The ecologists can't win just through ecological action groups. And women can't win without men and others. And we all need to work for constraints. We have to work for laws, because, as a very wise man in the 19th century said, in France, between the rich man and the poor man, between the strong and the weak, between the master and the slave, it is freedom that oppresses and law which liberates. So we have to get constraints into place, because this will not happen spontaneously simply because it would be a good idea. And if I can leave you with anything, that would be my message.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make one point that, traditionally, all villages have been eco-villages, right? And I think that's of particular relevance to any discussion here about Mallorca. There's a fascinating study by a German geographer called von Thünen, who showed how in traditional villages they're surrounded by circles of land use. First of all, the vegetable gardens, close in the village or on the edge of the village, typically. Then the sort of grain land that is not so actively fertilized from manure and so on from the village and so on. Then quite often beyond that the village forest, because people had to get their firewood from not too far away because it's heavy to transport. And then typically beyond that, the rough grazing where the animals that were taken out in the morning could go and then would be returned to the village in the evening. And quite often the animals actually had stables inside the village, having been taken out during the day and having been brought back in the evening, and then the cows were milked in the village. This is quite typical for many European villages. And I'd just like to make the point that here in Mallorca, I'm sure when you look closely, similar patterns of relationship between the traditional village and the surrounding countryside can be found. And of course, this link between the village and its own immediate hinterland has been broken by road construction and by transport systems. So suddenly the food can be brought in from halfway around the world, often from the airport like in Palma, being flown in and so on. And so that has broken the link between the village and its own hinterland, and has then caused the disruption also of the traditional locally based lifestyles. And the reason I'm mentioning all this now is, I think on the one hand, it is very important to think about creating new eco-villages. But on the other hand, let's also look at the existing villages and how, at a time when oil and other transport fuels and so on become more expensive, we can look towards reintegrating local villages back into the landscapes out of which they have grown. And so I think that's a really worthwhile discussion to have, what relevance all this has to an island like Mallorca, where the villages currently are often commuter village or tourist villages, and how that can change if we had the sense to reintegrate villages back into their local farmland.
Thank you, Habib. Thank you.
There's a definite need to prepare for a more sustainable future, and this resulted in many different approaches. We heard this morning from a number of them, and there are many, many others around the world who understood the problem and were working towards solutions. Now, the eco-village movement is part of that alliance, but which chose a rather different strategy. The eco-village movement was based on the idea example by creating a positive vision for the future that where one could actually work every day in building the kind of communities which would be necessary in the long future if we are to live sustainably. So this is the special characteristic of the eco-village movement. It's a matter primarily of lifestyle, changing lifestyle. We considered in the beginning that this was actually a very revolutionary strategy, which was laying the foundation of an entirely new kind of civilization. But it was a very, very long-term project. And a lot of us felt that we probably would not be around when that new civilization dawned. And so this is a long-term strategy. And in terms of what we have been able to accomplish in roughly 20 years or so since we had this vision, is that we've been able to establish a worldwide network of eco-villages. Our strategy was to link them together so that they could exchange experience and exchange information and visit each other, and in this way make the whole movement much stronger. And that we have accomplished. We have now 3 major regional networks, one in the Americas, one in Europe, Africa, and one in Asia. And as regards the one in Europe, of which you're part, we have approximately 18 or so national networks. And we also have a Gen Council, which represents the entire Europe, 35 different countries. And each year the Europeans meet at what they call their General Assembly. And at this time they meet together to present their projects, exchange ideas, and elect a new Gen Council. And so one thing that I might suggest to you is that you become a member of Europe.
Could you just say what GEN stands for, Ross?
GEN is the Global Eco-Village Network. Yeah.
Is that the website also?
Yes. gen.ecovillage.org. You can also look under gaia.org, which is our website, and there are a number of links to it there. And then, yeah, question? In the European network, we have 2 kinds of members. There is what we call the voting members, which are actually recognized eco-villages, and there are what we call projects. Yours would probably be a project initially, but all are welcome, and many of the members are not really eco-villages, but they're simply, they could be demonstration centers like, let's say, for example, the CATS in Wales, the Centre for Alternative Technology, or the Centre for Renewable Energy in Denmark, and others. So we're open to even individuals, sometimes our members. So that was the one major accomplishment we've had today, is establishing the networks. And the second one is establishing an educational program for sustainability, which Hildur has mentioned yesterday, and which now is being made available, among others, in Spanish and English, through the Open University of Catalonia, and which is also being taught at eco-villages around the world. I might just mention that a characteristic of eco-villages is that, especially the medium to larger ones, are almost entirely education centers for their regions. And this is something you might want to also think about, because a key aspect of the strategy is outreach, is educating your region to understand the concepts of sustainability and helping people in your region to develop additional eco-villages and generally just to think more in terms of a sustainable future. And we'll try to give you a couple of examples, and I'll let Hildur just carry on with some of her comments. Do you want to say something about the social aspect, Hildur?
But, well, I thought that you were going to talk about Damanhur now.
No, go ahead with yours. I'll come back.
Well, yeah, we started with thinking of making a permaculture organization and working inside the permaculture movement, but I felt that the social aspect was much too little integrated in it, and also half of the people in the permaculture movement, they liked the idea of spirituality, and the other half was really opposed to it. So I felt that for me personally, it wouldn't work to work inside the permaculture movement at that time. This is 15 years ago. So we decided to create a new movement. I had for years. For 20 years at that time, we had been living in a co-housing. We started that when our two boys were like newborn and 1 year old. We had two boys at that time. And I felt as a woman that to choose between having a full-time job and to stay with my children was not a real choice. I felt really trapped, and I felt I had to find a new solution to that. I had to find a new way of organizing life. And that was in '68 when everybody was ready to accept new ideas. So I started studying cultural sociology and looked around the world to see how things had been organized in other cultures and at other times. And what we came up with and what we started locally was one of the first 3 Danish co-housings under the headline that children need 100 parents. And the same time as we started, 2 other projects started. And now there are like more than 200 co-housings in Denmark. Co-housing is a place where you each have your dwelling, your house, and then you have a common house, a common facility. And you can also have alternative energy. You can have gardens, you can have animals. This concept of co-housing has spread all over the world. It's in America. There are more than 200 in America. They have spread to Australia. They have gone to Holland, to Sweden, and Norway. But after a period, I felt it was still too narrow a solution. It wouldn't solve the global problems. It would solve my personal problem as a mother. But I needed to have a different concept, a much larger concept. I needed to create something which would make me feel good if I traveled to Africa. So eventually it became the eco-village concept that we wanted to manifest. And the eco-village is like permaculture is part of the eco-village concept, but we have enlarged the eco-village concept with a social dimension, and we have enlarged it with a spiritual dimension. From the very start on, we felt that changing ourselves and reaching a different kind of consciousness, a global consciousness, comprising the whole world, and saying we don't want any solution which is not possible for everybody. That had to be part of the movement, and I've stuck to that ever since. And at times it has been difficult because it's much more easy to get funding for ecological projects than it is for spiritual projects. There's a real resistance everywhere to that still, even if it's changing a lot these days. But so what we wanted was to create a movement which had a definite permaculture ecological point of view, but also really integrated social aspect where women and children and disabled and unemployed and old people would have full lives, that they wouldn't be like standing outside and not be part of society and community. And then having the spiritual. After some years also people insisted that we needed to include economic as a separate kind of thinking. Personally, we created a Danish co-housing where we lived for 20 years and where our children grew up, and it was a huge success, our old co-housing. And all the children of a co-housing, they want to live in co-housings, even if it's very difficult to establish them because you need some land and to build, because it's very difficult to make it inside existing structures. And it's very, very difficult for the next generation. They're trying very hard, and I think that 3 of them already live in co-housings, but it's very difficult for the children of our co-housing to establish this.
Want me to carry on?
No, I lost the thread. Hey?
Would anybody like to comment?
Maybe you could say something more about the economics of this. I mean, do people have jobs outside?
Yeah, in co-housings,
Do they have
co-housings, they live normal lives. It's really only the informal, the
Yeah.
shadow economy or
Yeah.
the sunshine economy, which is different.
Yeah.
So it's a place where people are very loving, and children have such a great time. Children love to grow up in co-housings. They can roam around freely. They can have animals. They can see plants and nature. They have lots of friends all the time. The parents need not organize every day with whom shall my children play today and drive back and forth. I mean, it's for me, there's no doubt that this is a real great idea. And it's been copied. They come from all over the world and make films about Danish co-housings. But still, it's not solving a global problem. So we need to take some steps further. And we did that personally by moving to the other end of Denmark, leaving our old co-housing, getting 70 acres of land where we could create a spiritual community, and where we could make a permaculture design, where we could be like 20 families trying to live together to create this, and also to make it the center of teaching and organization globally of the eco-village movement. And we moved there with Robert and Diane Gilman from the Context Institute, and we had a really good group ready to go there, but for 3 years we didn't get permissions to build. And we worked very hard with local authorities. The municipality, they loved us, and they took all their visitors from abroad to come and see us. But the county, they were against it. You should not build in the countryside, which is a good law, but for us it worked against creating this. So after 10 years we moved back, but we continued organizing the global eco-village movement and writing books and so forth. And we are still in the process of creating another project, because you cannot give up your ideas and your wish for community and for a different lifestyle. But now our main community is like the global eco-village and the Gaia education networks around the world.
Thank you.
Anybody would like to ask a question until we continue?
I still need to understand the economics of the eco-village. I get it for co-housing, but I don't understand. Do people work outside? Do you grow all your own food?
Let me
are you
answer
totally
that.
self-sufficient?
Yeah.
What's the...
I think the one word I would mention here is diversity. There is no single answer to your question.
Okay.
You have everything from eco-villages where everybody works outside to where almost everybody works inside. But I would say that the typical is probably closer to 50-50. It's a transition thing, you know. I mean, there are just often not jobs in the places where these villages are located. So everybody is normally responsible for their own finances. However, again, there are exceptions. One of the first eco-villages in Denmark, called Svanholm, one of the biggest ones, started out with a common purse strategy. Everybody shared. And there are a very small number of that type around the world, you know, but most of them are based on individual responsibility for your own finances. But I would really emphasize this diverse aspect, because you may be thinking, well, what should we do here? And I would say, well, we have many different examples. In Sri Lanka, for example, there are 15,000 villages in the third world countries operating in a network based on Buddhism. In Denmark, I could give you examples of fairly mainstream eco-villages which have, say, 100 units, some for seniors, some for young people, some for families, different owner relationships, permaculture designs, and animals, located very close to Copenhagen. And there are even some hippie communities back from the 1970s that still exist. Many people have this vision of eco-villages that it has something to do with rejecting society and living alone, isolated, and being a hippie. This is completely wrong. But this is a feeling that somehow some people got back in the 70s. But today, eco-villages are very modern places to live. They have all the modern conveniences. We're very much connected to the internet and as modern as anyone else.
It's not a hippie ghettos.
Not at all. Although there are some like that. There are a few. There are a few. As I say, you name it. It's so diverse. And they're also urban. They're also urban eco-villages. Not too many, because it's very difficult in the cities. But there is one, for example, in southern London called Bedshead, which calls itself an eco-village. And there are a few other places. I'd like to just take one example, which I think might have relevance for Mallorca. And it's a story which goes back to, I think, 1997, roughly, when we had the first European meeting of global eco-village, or the Gen Europe, the European branch of Gen. And we met in a very lovely place in northern Italian called Torre Superiore, which is a group there which took over an abandoned village which had been built into the mountainside, a fantastic, beautiful site, and we're gradually converting it into 180 living quarters for different families. And we met there for the first time to elect the first Gen Council for all of Europe. And one of the amusing things was that the Italian people were just forming their network for the first time, and they were trying to find a good name. And when we arrived there, they said, well, we have a name. And we said, well, what is it? And they said, Genitalia. Oh, we said, no, that won't work. So they found another name. But then, after this meeting, so after this meeting, we had a tour of some of the existing eco-villages in that part of the Italy. And we'd been hearing a lot of stories about this very mysterious place called Damanhur. And it was kind of the feeling was that a lot of the other Italians were kind of mystified about that. They were apparently a very big community near Torino, and they were not part of the meeting. And there was a feeling that they were somehow very different from everyone else. And so Hilda and I, we decided to find out. And so after this meeting, we drove up and visited this place, Damanhur. And that was one of the biggest experiences of our lives. This was a fantastic place. How many here have ever heard of Damanhur? Can you spell it? D-A-M, Damanhur. A-N-H-U-R. And they have a website. Damanhur. It actually means city of
the sun.
Light. City of the sun.
City of the sun.
It's an Egyptian word, actually. Where is it? It's located about 1 hour drive from north of Torino.
One page here you can see about from Damanhur.
Pardon?
It's in Italy?
It's in northern Italy.
Near Torino, at the foot of the Alps.
In the valley of, you remember the name of the valley?
Aosta, the Valcusella.
Valcusella. And what was interesting about these people was that one of the many things, but one of the most striking things was that for 25 years they had been building an underground temple in a mountain right beside their site. And it had only become public knowledge just shortly before we came there. And it is the most beautiful place. Some people are calling it the 8th wonder of the world. I mean, it's so beautiful. They have 7 different sort of individual temples within the large temple, and it goes halls. It goes 70 meters under the ground, and it has a fantastic energy. And it is built up with different themes. They call it the Temple of Humankind, and it traces the whole history of civilization. So I really could recommend anybody to visit just for that. Well, no. Well, this is the thing that puts some people off. They think, is this a sect or what? Well, the fact is they do have a very special religion, and it is a very spiritual place. Their leader, who calls himself Falco, they all take on, by the way, animal names as part of their tradition.
And plant names.
And plant names for Africa. Yeah. He has developed this religion, but he's not. They're not a missionary. They're not missionaries. They're not trying to convert anyone. And they're extremely lovely people, very well balanced. But they have their own sort of spiritual paths.
They have 7 different spiritual paths.
7 different paths, and they accept also others who have other traditional paths. And they are one of the things that is special about them is that they're artists. They are experts world class in all kinds of art, in ceramics, in metalwork, normal painting, mosaics, you name it. And they have workshops, and they sell their products all over the world in the most expensive airports and Tiffany's in New York and so forth. Really world class.
And all the ceilings in the different halls in the underground temple are made of glass mosaics, with lights on the other side. So it's beautiful, beautiful ceilings.
But
So 1 more minute, 2 minutes?
yeah, so what I wanted to mention, which may be of interest here, is that Damanhur is actually not a single eco-village, although they're a member of the network now.
The federation.
But they call themselves a federation. They consider themselves as a state within the state. They elect their own leaders. But the interesting thing from this point of view of Mallorca is that they're not located just in one place. They're located throughout the valley. So they have many individual houses where there might live maybe 12 or 13 people, or sometimes maybe 20, in different locations around the valley. But then they have one central place where they have their workshops and their meeting rooms and a lot of other activities. And they have a lot of outreach also in the valley. They're very politically active. One of their members is the mayor of the nearest town, and a number of the others are members of various other communities, councils. And so they're very active in education. They have their own schools. They actually have a university. They have 40 businesses. They have their own currency, which has existed for 20 years. And it's just so big a story that I really would, I could go on and on. But I think it's interesting that it is possible to have a project which is quite decentralized in that sense, that you might have a similar type of model with several different eco-villages or locations around Mallorca, and maybe have some central place where you could have your educational and outreach facilities.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Thank you. In India, Mahatma Gandhi said that true India lives in her 700,000 villages. And Gandhi's dream was to turn every village into a village republic. That was his word. Village republic, which means that each village, what he calls Swadeshi, self-organized, self-governing, self-managing, microcosm of the macrocosm. How the earth is a self-managing system. In the same way, our human bodies are self-managing systems. So a village could be a self-managing system. So the idea of eco-villages, as Ross and Hildur have talked about, and idea of restoring villages, European old villages, what Herbie has talked about, similar idea was Gandhi trying to bring in India. But Gandhi's vision was not just an intellectual, ideas-based vision. Although head is important, ideas are important, but it must also have heart. And heart comes in with spirituality. Now, lots of people have a little bit of uneasy feeling with the word spirit. Now, I would like to say from a Gandhian perspective, spirit is nothing to do with ghosts. Spirit is nothing to do with spiritualism. Spirit is the human spirit, human body and human spirit. I talked about love yesterday. What is love? Somebody asked me this morning, can you explain what do you mean by love? I said, love means we are all related. Simple. We are all related. All humans are related. Humans and animals are related. Humans, animals and plants are related. Humans, animals, plants and rivers are related. Humans, animals, plants, rivers and oceans are related. Mountains are related. Sky related. Moon related. Sun related. Stars related. we are all related. And therefore, when you are related, you are in love. You feel a sense of relationship. And that was Gandhi's idea. The village should feel itself related. It's a kind of network, a web of relationships. And so, when I was a young monk, 18 years old, I read this vision of Gandhi in his book, Autobiography of Gandhi, in which he said that spirituality is not living in a monastic order. Some people become monks and live in a monastic order and say, world is a bad place, it's establishment, it's capitalism, it's communism, it's socialism, it's money, it's business, it's bad. We have to escape from this, what I call hippie ghetto when I mentioned, this monk ghetto, and spirituality is there. He said, no, spirituality has to be brought in everyday life. Your business has to be spiritual. Your politics has to be spiritual. Your economics has to be spiritual. Your cooking has to be spiritual. Your cleaning the floor and cleaning the toilet has to be spiritual. Spirituality in everyday life. How does that happen? Work is the same. You clean the toilet. You can clean the toilet. You can cook the meal. You can prepare the garden. You can grow vegetables in the garden. But there are two ways to do it. One is just to grow food, to feed people. Absolutely necessary. But that is also an expression of relationship. And that expression of relationship is also the expression of love. And that expression of love is the human spirit in practice. Human spirit in practice. So transforming ordinary activity into spiritual activity. That was Gandhi's politics. And when I read this as a monk, I was so inspired that one night, after midnight, I left the monkhood, I escaped from the monastery and joined the Gandhian movement, the village movement. And by that time, Gandhi was not alive himself, but a very great follower of Gandhi, called Vinoba Bhave, Jose mentioned his name yesterday, he was going from village to village to village, trying to bring about kingdom of compassion. He said Gandhi brought political independence to India through non-violent, compassionate, peaceful means. We should do the same thing in economics. And we should bring about land reform and economic reform and village restoration through compassionate, peaceful, non-violent means. So he went from village to village to village. He walked for 20 years. He walked 100,000 miles. We think walking from here to Inca is too far. He walked length and breadth and depth of India for 20 years, asking landlords, say, I am a messenger of peace. I am a representative of the poor. I am the child of the poor. If you have 5 children, consider me the 6th child, the children of the poor, and give me 1/6 of your land to distribute to the poor. 1/6 of your land. He calculated that if 1/6 of the land of India was distributed to the poor, there would be no landless person. And having access to land is birthright to every Indian citizen. That was Vinoba. Having land, access to land, never ownership, but access to, he did not believe in ownership, but access to land is the birthright of every Indian, like a birthright of every animal, the birthright of every tree. If tree has no land, how will it survive? If the cows have no land, if the pigs have no land, if the deer have no land, if the snakes have no land, if the lions and tigers and elephants have no land, how will they survive? They have land. Tigers and elephants and deer have land, but humans don't. Why? Why we are so stupid? When animals are so wise, that everybody can have land for their food, but humans cannot have land. And if we have no land, how are we going to get our food? So Vinoba said that poverty is not because the poor are stupid. Poverty is there not because poor cannot grow food, or poor cannot build houses, or poor cannot make shoes. They know this skills. Poor are the ones who are growing food for the rich. Poor are the ones who are making shoes and building houses and making clothes for the rich. But poor have no access to resources. Poor have no access to land. We, the rich, have appropriated the land and say, I'm the owner of the land. This is my land. Vinoba said, nobody owns the land. Humans don't own nature. Humans don't own land. Humans are not born with the ownership of land. Land belongs to itself, and humans belong to the land. So he wanted to shift the consciousness of human beings. This idea that I own nature, I own trees, I own forests. And he shifted that consciousness. And 5 million acres of land, as Jose yesterday mentioned, 5 million acres of land was given in gifts, free gifts to Vinoba. Say, here is my 100 acre, here's my 50 acre, here's my 20 acre, 1/6 of my land, please give to the poor. And he distributed 5 million acres in 20 years to the poor. And I was part of that movement. I walked with Vinoba. I went with Vinoba to the landlords, rich landlords. And you know, getting land in India is very difficult. People will say, you can have some money, you can have some hospitality, you can have something, but land I cannot give. This is my precious land. I've inherited from my ancestors. I have to leave it for my children. How can I part from my land? So precious, big population in India, so little land. I cannot part with land. But Vinoba said that you are not the owners of the land. This is a misconception that humans can own the land. What a revolution it was. And the Prime Minister was coming sort of to Vinoba. The rich people, the business people, the media, everybody was coming to this naked fakir. He was a loincloth and a shawl like this, not so beautiful, maybe not so expensive as Satush, but a cotton cloth. But he was representing the poor. He was representing the oppressed. He was representing the exploited. But he did not see the landlord as the enemy. He did not see that you are the enemy. He said, you are not my enemy. You are my friend. You are just living in ignorance. I have come with the light, with the information, with the knowledge, with the wisdom of the ancient India. Wisdom of ancient India. Wisdom does not belong to Vinoba or Gandhi. It belongs to ancient culture. When we say, Sabai Bhumi Gopalki, all land belongs to Lord, the Creator, meaning all living beings. Land belongs to all living beings. So for me, that was great inspiration. And so if I think we can inspire that Gandhian, Vinobian compassion, love, human spirit, I tell you, from Gandhi's perspective, Martin Luther King's perspective, the Dalai Lama's perspective, Mother Teresa's perspective, the weapon of nonviolence is much stronger weapon. This is what Jose said yesterday. Weapon of nonviolence, weapon of love, weapon of peace, weapon of compassion is much more powerful to bring about transformation than any other weapons. So, but at the moment, the weapon of nonviolence, the weapon of peace and compassion and love is lying in the cupboard. Nobody's using it. Only weapon we know is weapon of money, or weapon of power, or weapon of nuclear, or weapon of military. We only know that, and we spend billions and billions of pounds and dollars on those weapons. But nobody teaches and nobody learns how to use nonviolence and how to use compassion to bring about transformation and change for everybody. Nobody out. No enemies. For Gandhi, there are no enemies. For Martin Luther King, there are no enemies. I had great pleasure and honor of meeting Martin Luther King in his office and his house. And he was, I tell you, I have met in my 72 years many people around the world. But when I was sitting by Martin Luther King, it was totally different experience. The aura, the presence, the love, the compassion, the serenity, the inclusivity which emanated and a kind of glowed out of Martin Luther King was incredible. And that was power of love. That was what I talked about, love. What love means is that relatedness. We are all together. This is what Susan said. We all have to work together. We cannot just by ourselves do anything. We have to be together. So my experience and my story is story of Gandhi and Vinoba and land reform. And I'm happy to announce a small piece of news which I heard from Vandana this morning, that the two great champions of this land reform movement after Vinoba, called Jagannathan and Rajamma, husband and wife, they were the great champions, and they walked with Vinoba, and they persuaded not only the landlords but the temples. Like you have here Catholic churches with lots of property and land. They went to the temples and said, you have 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 acres of land, so much big property, and people are starving. And you say, we are religious people. They persuaded the temples to give land. And the happy news is that Rajamma and Krishnamal have been given the alternative Nobel Prize called Right Livelihood Award of this year. Isn't that wonderful? So, friends, we have this wealth of information knowledge here among our panelists, our guests, from Jose, from Herbie, from Vandana, Susan, Ross, Hildur. They have brought so much wealth of information and inspiration to us, and they have devoted all their life. Why they are so special? Because they have dedication, they have commitment, they have experience, and they have also gained wisdom through all that. And we are all capable of becoming Jose and Susan and Herbert and Vandana and Ross and Hildur. We are all capable. We can all be activists. We can all commit ourselves to bring about transformation, not for ourselves, but for our communities, for our people, for our members of our Ireland. So if we all commit and dedicate ourselves, I think we can be the pioneers of new Mallorca. Thank you very much.
So, about land, this is, in France, this has been a very big fight since the beginning of the 20th century of the farmers who rent land. And after the Second World War, this fight was put on in a law, and this law has been getting better and better during the struggles of the farmers during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And now we have a good law to protect the farmers when they rent land. So this is the general situation. But where we live, after the negotiation I talked to you yesterday on the land with the army, it's the collectivity who owns the land and who gives the land to the farmer. And we give a contract to each people who has the land or a house, it's the same. And we say to that people, this man or a woman, we give you the land until you have finished to work. That means 65 years old. And even if you have 20 years old, you have a contract for 45 years, and so on. So people can stay on the land, and they know that they can build their life there. And so we can give to the people the guarantee that they can live correctly, but we can give them the guarantee that they can build what they think they have to do. So that's how we do. And when these people have finished with their work, we propose to them, if they want to stay in the area, to build their house or try to find a new house and we try to let them go on that way. That means that when you get out from your farm, if you build something better than it was, the new people who comes inside of the house or the farm gives you income for the amelioration of the house. And with this income, you can build your own house. And so that's the way we found to use it collectively. And we can do this because we don't have to, people don't have to buy the houses, so there's no speculation on the houses. And one who gets out, who takes the money from the new, he has only to pay the amelioration and not the speculation of housing.
Thank you. Thank you. Question of forest?
On the issue of, on the one hand, the issue of timber, on the other hand, the wider issue of our relationship to forests. I mean, the reality of the situation is that it is very important that you pointed out that in Europe, actually, there's been a certain amount of regrowth of forests because of the fact that, sadly, we've actually been exploiting the cheaper wood from often illegal sources, as you said, from the rain. Oh. Right. Yes, we have been exploiting the cheaper timbers.
Tres is English.
One.
One, two. Which is it?
Uno.
I've got it now. Is it going all right? Right, fantastic. So, yeah, so we have been taking timber from these places where the wages are cheap and where the externalities of deforestation, that is the environmental and social cost of deforestation, were not included in the price of the timber. And that is the great tragedy, what has been happening in particular in rainforest areas, but also, as Vandana pointed earlier on, where attempts are made also deforest the headwaters of the Ganges and other rivers in Asia. The critical issue now is for people to become aware of the enormous costs of what we are doing to the world's ecosystems and the much more vulnerable ecosystems of rainforest. They are by definition much more vulnerable than the forests of Europe, where even though we have deforested large amounts of land and then reforested, there's been resilience, environmental resilience. It hasn't affected the climate, for instance. Whereas if you deforest in the Amazon on a very large scale, you can change the climate of the world, not only in terms of carbon dioxide, but also in terms of the moisture that comes from these rainforests. So we at the World Future Council are talking about something about what we call crimes against the future. We need to activate legal systems that allow us to point the finger to crimes that are being committed that cause irreversible damage to future generations and their chances of a reasonable, sustainable existence. And we are on the other hand, doing that, on the other hand, saying we also need to point out policies for a sustainable world that could really make a difference. And certainly in the context of timber, a useful starting point has been made with Forest Stewardship Council approval of what is legal and what is not illegal type of deforestation. But that does not go far enough because in the meantime, very large amounts of timber still slip through the net. So much more needs to be done in this area of establishing where damage is done to future generations and future life and how to assure that that is stopped. And certainly we need new international processes for that. And we at the World Future Council are trying to work on this.
Thank you, Jose. And now I'd like to ask Vandana to address.
So let me begin with soil, not oil. The three reasons I wrote the book and why I gave that title. The first was that everyone now recognizes climate change is a very serious problem. And yet the solutions being offered to climate change are either making everything worse or doing nothing at all. The three main solutions that have emerged in the last few years, one was the Kyoto Protocol, which basically allowed the polluters to get quotas to continue to pollute and to buy credits from those who polluted and reduced slightly. But those who didn't pollute weren't in the picture. And ordinary citizens were out of the discussion. In a way, the Kyoto Protocol did not recognize the atmosphere as a commons, but treated the atmosphere as the private property of the polluters. And in fact, Stern, in his very famous FAT report, has said that tradable emissions rights are like copyrights and patents, and they are like a property in the air. Now, when we used to talk about patents on life and patents of seed, people used to joke and said next they'll own the air.
Yeah.
But the whole tradable emissions issue is about owning the air. The second false solution is the resurgence of nuclear. Nuclear as clean energy. The most dirty energy in terms of life on Earth is now defined as clean energy. And the biggest deal on this has been made with this new US-India agreement, which nearly destroyed our parliament, nearly crumbled our democracy. It's had such serious consequences. The new conflicts in Kashmir are related to that. Some of the new tensions we are facing internally are all related to it. I won't go into those details. The third false solution was biofuels, that you can convert food crops and other crops into oil for cars. And it's now recognized that 75% of the rise in price of food over the last years was related to the diversion of soya and corn to make biofuels, ethanol and biodiesel. The second reason I felt very that this book needed to be written was a whole new cosmology was being created, and a new language of we must decarbonize the economy, we must become, we must have low carbon economies. Now, since I work in agriculture, and every time we compost, what we are really doing is creating lots of carbon to recycle in the soil. And the living soil is really humus, it's living carbon. And I felt it was very important that we not start thinking of carbon as a bad thing, but be able to differentiate between fossil carbon that human beings should never have touched, and living carbon, which is the basis of life. Yeah? And that what we really need to do is, in fact, increase the living carbon in our lives and reduce the dead carbon. Because the dead carbon is what is leading. Because it was created over millions of years, when you burn it, you're literally blowing up millions of years of the energy of the sun. Whereas when you use renewable energies in all its forms, you can recycle carbon. And in the book, I've basically shown how agriculture, done ecologically, organically, is the biggest solution to carbon recycling. Our research on our farms is showing 200% increase in carbon return to the soils. If we have trees on our farms and if we practice organic farming, 25% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from industrial agriculture. And another few percent are coming from globalized trade in food. So we could solve about 30% of the climate problem by ecological farming, localized food economies. And that creates better food, creates more jobs on land, and is a solution to food insecurity while solving the climate issue, both in mitigation, reducing emissions, but also in adaptation. Because when you get an extended drought, you will need soils rich in carbon. When you have floods, one reason the floods in Iowa this year were so bad, the scientists recognize there's no water retention in those soils. So there's instant flooding. Now, the third reason I wrote that is it's a common passion for Satish and me, and comes out of so much of Gandhi's teaching. The fossil fuel age, the oil age, made us imagine production must be based on industrial systems. because fossil fuel gave us industrialism, coal, oil, etc. But there's production beyond oil, and that production is called crafts. Yeah? Either you have industrial systems driven by subsidized fossil fuels, which have hidden behind them what one of our very dear friends in the energy discussion from the Rocky Mountain Institute has called energy slaves. That, behind energy slave, that behind every American, there are 1,000 invisible people. But they don't eat the food we eat, they eat energy. They eat fossil fuel. But the impact on the planet is 1,000 times more. And those combined harvesters who was, Herbie was talking about the combined harvester, the big machines in the landscape of England, they're being driven by energy slaves. It seems to be one driver, with 300 invisible people sitting on that, whom we don't see. And I think it's because, I think that's why they created angels and demons, It's a nice way to visualize, Angels are the invisible good things behind you.
Yeah.
And the demons are the invisible bad things behind you.
Yeah.
And I think we need to make these invisibles visible to understand the ecological footprint. But very intimately related to the energy slaves was every energy slave replaced a real person. And by replacing the real person, created poverty. Now, over time, what has happened is this poverty has accumulated in the South. But I call it creating redundant and disposable people. People who are not needed in society. And redundancy is the language they use now. They've just removed 2,000 air hostesses from one company in India overnight, and it's called redundancy. And for me, the destruction of the earth is very painful. But seeing people who could do things with their hands, with their minds, and throwing them as waste of history is a very, very painful process. And I watched it happen in India, where, if you have a rural economy, everyone's busy, everyone's doing something or the other. The old woman who's blind can still spin a wheel and spin cloth, because she's done it so long she doesn't need to see anymore, Or the old grandfather can just sit on a cot and look after the grandchildren while the parents go off in the field. There's a role for everybody. So if we have to have life beyond oil, then we need to bring back crafts in a very central way. And the beauty about crafts is they create creative work. They put our hands and minds to use. They don't destroy the environment. And ultimately, as Satish never tires, they create beauty.
Yeah.
So I want to just end on that note of beauty. And I brought these partly because they are a result of cross-fertilization between Mallorca and our work in India in Navdanya. Laura has been coming over the last year as a result of our courses here. And she'll go and, pick up something in the market and say, wouldn't this be nice to use? So what we've done over the year, inspired very much by Laura's visits, is work with the best group that promotes artisanal crafts in India. And this also is linked to Gandhi. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay was put to work by Gandhi in the 30s when we had a similar economic depression and said, go rejuvenate the crafts as a way of securing livelihoods. And she spent all her life finding the little crafts in the villages and bringing them back to use. So all of these are now packaging we're doing where the container is handcrafted. And each of them, it comes from a different part of the country. And inside are Navdanya's organic products. So this is a spice. And this is how, when I grew up, this is how our kitchen spices used to be kept, And it's really not inventing a shuttle to the moon. where I notice a lot of people want to run away to, including the very bright scientist who can't speak, Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
The other day was giving an interview. Humanity is in a very deep crisis. I said, you got it, you're so right on. And then he says, we must explore space to solve this problem. We need the soil to solve this problem. This is a tea box.
Made with bamboo.
And this is made with bamboo, but the art is a very famous style of Orissa, the coastal area of Orissa, and it's called Patichitra. On strips of bamboo, they used to write all the ancient scriptures and then the artwork. So they're little strips of bamboo put together with this very, very fine work. And that's cloth, again handcrafted cloth and handmade. We're putting everything with natural sugar. Because again, just like carbon has been criminalized, sweeteners have been criminalized. Now, industrial sugar is a killer. But our wonderful artisanal sugar is actually healthy for you.
Yeah.
In Ayurveda, it's given as food. So the natural sugars will go in this. Yeah.
In an Indian religious ashram like Ganesh Puri, if you go there, if you are eating sweet, which is local sweet like this, you can stay as long as you want. But if you are eating chili, you have to go after 3 days. Because chili is rajasic.
Right.
And sugar is, gur is sattvic.
Gur and sugar and gur. You have 3 forms of natural artisanal sugar. Gur, which is sort of the rocky stuff. And then shakkar, which is brown. Brown sugar, not as the step before cocaine. And this one, again, processed totally naturally, is white. But it's not industrially processed, no chemicals used.
Yeah.
And this is another spice box. This is a tribal art, where they burn the design onto it. And this is another lovely cross-fertilization. We've been saving seeds forever, for 25 years now. And Laura saw something in some shop, some kind of box all in Spanish, and sent it to us. Then we had a Spanish intern who sat and worked with Maya, and this is something we are starting with schools, Seeds of Freedom. For the farmers, we've got to give sackfuls of seed. But for the children to understand what's going on with the seed, the terminator, the sterility in being used in creating non-renewable seed, or the patenting of seed, etc. Rather than give it heavy, we're doing it with real seeds that children eat and making them familiar with it. And this is now being introduced in all our schools, where we have already started gardens with organic gardens and vegetable gardens. But now they'll also have the seed saving kits, and it's called Seeds of Freedom. So thank you, Laura. And I think, all this shows that we do need 2 things to be hugely globalized. One is our consciousness. Yeah? We need a very, very deep planetary consciousness. And we need a lot of cross-fertilization, like these workshops we do here. I think cross-fertilization can be very, very global. And the rest should be as local as possible. The products we use in our everyday life.
I want to underline what Yvonne Murray and our friend Blathke said. As researchers, as geographers, if you don't have the information, and particularly if people are hiding the information from you, that means obviously that it is valuable, and that this is a valuable commodity for the movement as well. And in order to get at that information, I didn't understand if you had a local institution that was doing that research or if you need one. But if you need a local institution, I can't recommend enough that be funded. I have seen transformation because young, smart researchers were funded, like the Alter Europe movement. They are people who started at TNI 10, 12 years ago as young researchers doing terrific work, and now they're changing a great many things in Europe because they get the information and they disseminate it. And that is what the powerful don't want. Information has been wealth forever. Maps used to be secret documents. And I'm sure that the land ownership here, if it's a secret document, that is also for very good reasons to keep the wealth where it is right now and prevent any of the sorts of things that we want to do. So I just really want to stress that importance. And then I want to give Vandana a quote, which I think she will like, which is, "A tree is the very slow explosion of a seed."
Thank you, Susan. We don't have more.